How's it going? How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. We're gonna be doing something different today. I thought it would be fun to react to my first ever draft big board that I did for the 2019 draft. To be honest, this was probably not my best work, but yeah, I think I've learned a lot since then, and it's gonna be interesting to dive in and look at some of the rankings I got right, some of the many rankings I got wrong. I wrote like 20,000 words on this, which I would not recommend doing. Don't do this to yourself. But anyways, like, subscribe, comment would all be so appreciated. You guys are all the best. Thanks everyone for the support. Number one, this was the consensus opinion for a reason. I've talked about Zion plenty. He was under prospect, but this next 2, 3, 4. I should not. I can't believe I had John Morant at 4 when I feel like I even knew at the time. Like I said, right, even towards the end of this blurb, that a lot of these issues that he has, the shooting, the strength, they're fixable, and he has all these qualities that we look for in primary initiators. I value this advantage creation stuff so much more than I did at the time. And I think that's definitely going to be evident. But there's just some weird stuff like I don't know what I meant by this. Like his overall self creation outside of the rim is the most important skill for primary initiators. I certainly would not think that's true. And I'm not really even sure what I meant there because Ja was a pretty decent mid range creator as a prospect. And I don't think that's true at all. That's the thing that matters most for prospects. I also, um, let's get into Brandon Clark at 3, which honestly, like I say it right at the beginning, I just wouldn't have had a 23-year-old non-shooting 6'8" guy in the lottery. I have learned how much age really matters in terms of upside and projecting stars, which is what you're shooting for at the top of a draft. Like Clark is a good player. I think I was generally right about a lot of the things Clark did well, except for his shooting. And I think the shooting projection is something I've learned and changed a lot about. Let's look at Clark's shooting stats. Obviously, he changed his mechanics a lot at Gonzaga, but still only took 15 threes. And volume is so important for projecting shooting. It's so rare for guys that never shoot in college to shoot in the league. And even though, yeah, Clark was a great touch guy, mid range scorer, like I should have known. And now, looking back, I certainly wouldn't have liked Clark, but he was a pretty awesome prospect. And I'd love to do a video on him at some point. Number 2, Jarrett Culver, someone who I will absolutely be doing a video on at some point in the near future. Yeah, this one was a really good lesson for me about how much scoring really matters. I definitely kind of overvalued these like quote unquote like complementary skills. Like I just wouldn't be so interested in drafting these like role players. I was very into these like winning impact on title team players, which doesn't really mean anything, right? And if this is who you are in college as like a role player, I do agree his finishing was very good still back then, but yeah, I definitely did not kind of understand how much the quickness mattered, his lack of shooting mattered. I do think Culver is a better prospect than he was back then, or better prospect than he ended up becoming in the league. But I do think this was rich, right? And a lot of people had this take. It wasn't just me, and this also wasn't even true because he wasn't that great of a slashing projection, and the shooting was really questionable. But yeah, even though like passing, defense, all that stuff is good, you've got to be able to score to play on the perimeter. That's it. Unless you're like the best defender in the league or up there, you've got to be able to score. I had no, not Grant Williams. I had Jonte Porter at 5. I did not, didn't do a background check into his gambling habits necessarily, but I definitely stand by him being a very good prospect, and he could be a fun player to do a video on one day. Obviously, had the injuries and the, the stuff that would happen later in his career. But Porter was an improving athlete, an incredible shooter. His feel for the game was awesome, a really good mover. Like I absolutely still endorse Jonte as a prospect. I think this was a lot of these rankings, I think I absolutely would, if I was scouting that class at this time, I would have changed, but I honestly might stand by this. But Grant Williams at 6, kind of a similar thing to Brandon Clark, where I feel like I was probably like overthinking this. Where Williams, I do agree with this, that I think he'd be most optimized in an environment which he'd be a playmaker out of the short roll, though he just wasn't really able to do that in Boston. And again, this is another like 3-point projection thing. And Williams actually did end up becoming a good shooter. Just the scoring never really translated. He was a great difficult shot maker in college, but that just wasn't enough to carry him to value at the next level. It's tough to do this without the elite size and athletic tools, which Grant Williams just didn't have. 7, RJ Barrett, which I think was probably like around the right area, but I certainly think I was a lot too mean to prospects. I certainly would not have said stuff like this. They were like, he's an awful team defender. RJ, with such conviction that RJ believes he's a primary and he's not. Even if I believe that, right? That I think part of his issue was always as a prospect that he was wired to be on the ball and struggled to play off the ball. But he has improved. He has scaled down. His passing has gotten better. And I definitely think like 7th overall was probably right for him in this class. But I definitely don't wouldn't have kind of talked about him the same way. Man, Jackson Hayes, what a prospect Jackson Hayes was. This is another one that I think I feel fine about where I acknowledge that, yeah, we don't know what Hayes is going to be. We don't know what's going to happen. I had this weird idea that like big men didn't matter and they were like running backs and they were really easy to replace, which was such a weird and misinformed way to think. Obviously not true. Um, but I definitely do still think being high on Hayes was reasonable. Incredible movement skills, really great touch around the rim. I probably overstated his feel, like it was probably even worse than this, but Hayes, I don't think, was destined to be a bad NBA player. And another good call, Goga Bitadze here at 9 overall. This one I also feel like I got pretty correct that he's good at basketball, will be a good NBA player, and I still stand by that. It is really important, these like young guys who produce at crazy high levels in pro leagues, right? And Goga was just a good player, like really smart, great touch, could dribble a little bit. Again, I bought way too much into the shooting, I think, but Goga was really nice for the Magic this last year, and I think he's going to keep being a good basketball player going forward. Number 10, another good one, PJ Washington. I remember there was a big debate between him and Grant Williams at the time, and PJ has definitely won that debate for the moment. But this was a good take here, right? That he can potentially convert to the wing at times, which is kind of what he's done, right? He wasn't really, asked to do much small ball 5 stuff because he had 2 good bigs on his team in Dallas during the playoff run this year. But PJ was really good on the perimeter, right? He ended up being a good shooter. He was, he did end up improving his handle and self creation, ended up being a really nice player. So I like PJ a lot at the time. I thought he was a great prospect, and I think that was a good sell. Oh, and now let's get back to Chuma Okiki at the end of this tier 2 group where man, Chuma was such a fun prospect. Another one where I really did not understand how much scoring mattered, where yeah, I kind of, undervalued the lack of athleticism and quickness and the finishing stuff. But I do think Okiki was a pretty good prospect that ended up just kind of getting screwed over by like a ton of injuries, like pretty decent shooting projection, right? Good volume, good percentages, free throws all right, but the free throw rate at that size is definitely concerning. I also really worry about low usage role players now in college. That's not something I really considered back then. But Chuma just got signed. Where did he sign? Someone just signed Chuma. Oh, I think it was the Knicks that just signed Chuma. So, hey, maybe Chuma Okiki can make a little comeback. But let's keep going with this draft board. And whew, Taylor Horton Tucker, what a prospect he was. And again, I still think that THT was a fine swing. Another one that probably couldn't score nearly enough, definitely a common thread here, where THT had some advantage creation stuff. So I think I still would have bet on THT to improve as a scorer. And he's still really young. Like THT, as I kind of said, was one of the youngest players in the draft. He's only like 23 or 24 now. Like, some rookies are that old. And I don't think Taylor Horton Tucker is going to be a star or anything, but I think the idea of betting on like very unorthodox kind of profiles is a good thing. And I think overall that I, support the process of having THT high. KPJ, Romeo Langford, another one who I think I definitely overvalued the impact of rim touch on finishing improvement, where yeah, a lot of guys who are great at the rim with touch can't shoot for shit. Like I said, undervalued this athleticism, the jump shooting, the athleticism in general, as I keep on saying. But yeah, Romeo obviously never ended up becoming anything. And man, I don't know why I ended up with Kobe White. I ended up having him lower. I definitely had him higher at points in this cycle, but ended up with him low. I'm not sure why. I think probably just because like some of the people who I really looked up to at the time were low on Kobe White, so I felt like I had to be low on Kobe White. Don't do that, people watching this. If you want to get into the draft, stick to your guns. Please do that. But yeah, I was, I think accurate about the creation, some of the playmaking, the height being and the size. But I had this idea similar with bigs that was very black and white, right? Like if you're a non-primary guard, I don't want you. If you're a primary guard, I want you. Where in the fact that we've seen, right, like his defense has been pretty good and he's evolved into a really impressive like secondary creator type for the Bulls. And right, there's one ball, but there's a lot of opportunities for playmaking, and White with being a good shooter has helped him play off the ball. So I think this, as well as being super low on Darius Garland, which was also a really, really bad one. That again, I think I just like was so kind of overvaluing this being against small guards and not thinking they can be good. But I also probably honestly didn't watch very much of Darius Garland at the time. He only played 4 games in college. I didn't have any like the same access to film that I have now. And I just, wasn't doing as much tape grinding as I do these days, which was, probably maybe me being kind of a poser at the time. But anyways, let's get to a couple ones I do think I got right. This is so bad. This is so bad. I think I was in high school when I wrote this. Yeah, I think I was a senior in high school when I wrote this. This is terrible. This is very over. I wrote like 20,000 words on this draft. This is extremely overwritten, but this is especially very, very overwritten. But I do think Bull being a very like high risk, high reward guy was true, and ended up, you know, the weaknesses ended up being too significant, which I think a lot of people had Bull higher than this. Hunter was a guy who I faded and I felt good about, despite being like a really nice on-ball defender and shot well on threes. A good idea not to bet on guys who don't have the crazy feel or athletic tools. He was an older prospect. Another one of these guys who was like a really good college role player, which oftentimes, unless they're like elite shooters, won't really translate to the league. And again, we look at some of the shooting numbers where he was hitting like a lot of threes, right? But the volume was so low. Under 6 a game, under 33-point attempt rate. That's quite low for like a legit shooting wing. The steal rate is generally a good indicator of like athletic tools and high end kind of impact. And DeAndre Hunter didn't really pass that test either. And then we have Cam Reddish, who, again, I would not be this kind of abrasive now. I just don't think that's necessary for these young people who I'm sitting on my ass at home writing that they're awful. Like, it's just a shitty thing to do. And it's not, it doesn't kind of achieve anything, right? I am all for being constructive and critical, which I think I am on this channel, but not like this. But I do think fading Cam Reddish was the right idea, where Reddish just didn't have the athleticism or feel to become a star, which I do definitely stand by still. You need the high end athletic traits and high end feel to be a star, really. And Reddish kind of didn't end up being that. And Reddish ended up being a really nice defender, like very fluid mover. I don't know. I kind of probably glossed over his defense too much at that point. But yeah, Cam wasn't really very good as a prospect, and I stand by that. And this was an interesting one. Matisse Thybulle, who I guess actually having him top 20 was probably a good thing, because Thybulle isn't really a good player now, but he had some really impressive defensive season. And again, I think just like historic numbers, really unique traits, and he wasn't a terrible offensive player. Like, he didn't get to the rim at all. He wasn't a creator. And I think, again, the creation was always an issue, but Thybulle's shooting issues again, I talk about shooting projection so much, and I feel like I've learned a lot, but Thibault's wasn't really even that bad. Like, he shot pretty well on his career. His volume was really good outside of his freshman year. He was a good free throw shooter. So, like, Thibault being such like a bad and timid shooter, I don't think was destined to happen necessarily. But yeah, it definitely didn't help that that's the way that Thibault ended up going as a shooter. I'm not going to read every single one of these. Siku Doumbouya, I was definitely correct to fade. I think just a very like raw player that was probably getting too much credit for that. Nikhil Alexander Walker, man, I should have been higher on, but I guess having him top 25 was all right. He'd go much higher than this in a redraft. But I think mostly I was pretty accurate here. He's like a tertiary wing creator. Unique offensive skills. And of course, I definitely don't think I understood the how good of a defender he was. And I value tools on defense a lot more than I used to. Like, yeah, a lot of young players who lack discipline, very common. Like, it's not a crazy thing at all. And most of them, especially one with the tools and some of the flashes of team defense that Nikhil had. I should have been higher on him. Alan Smilagic, man, he was fun. Claxton is another one who I feel like I liked more than having higher, honestly. Um, and I was definitely very wrong about his defense. He was always an amazing switch big, which I certainly valued. And I also didn't I don't know why I was so harsh on his lack of strength. He was an 18, 19-year old. Um, and I was wrong about him being a big wing, but he was a devastating defender last year. So I think Claxton is better than this. Iggy Brasdakis, I loved Iggy Brasdakis. Daquan Jeffries, man, that was a fun prospect that I really enjoyed watching. And Tyler Hero, this was one that I was definitely too low on, but Hero is a very divisive player, I guess. Um, but yeah, his shot was a lot better than it was in college. That ended up happening. Hero is really like an all-time kind of touch guy. And again, like just looking at the shooting projection, Hero, elite free throw shooter, elite long mid range shooter, really good volume, really good 3 point attempts rate. Like that's just going to be good. And that level of shooting at such a young age is definitely a valuable thing, regardless of like ancillary skills. I also think Kentucky guards just kind of always get a bump necessarily where I kind of just don't think I undersold how good of like a secondary type guy, and I should have definitely had him higher. And then Cam Johnson, who maybe I should have had higher, but yeah, 6'8" shooter. So in the 30s, I definitely, there were a lot of misses here. Charles Matthews, he was a menacing defender that I stand by would have been great if he was healthy. Shamori Pons, Carson Edwards. Conchar was a good one. That was kind of a sleeper that people didn't really pay attention to, who has ended up being a really good player in Memphis, or maybe not like a really good player, but a really solid one. And look at his absolutely ridiculous stat profile. Look at all that green. Outside of like middling 3 point volume and free throw, incredibly efficient interior score, amazing foul drawer, amazing defending numbers, amazing passing numbers, like efficient. All the advanced metrics loved him. He was just like a really good basketball player, and I think betting on those guys is generally a good idea. Nasir Little, yeah, someone who I definitely think was right to fade as well. Jordan Poole, man, I should have had him higher. I love Jordan Poole. I wrote an article about him at some point during this cycle where I was pretty high on him. But I definitely think too I was too low on how legitimately talented of an offensive player he is. And I think that like this is true that he had undeniable talent with the ball in his hands, and he showed that in a really good situation. Poole is obviously like a divisive player now, but I think he was definitely better than the 37th guy in this class. Who else is gonna be fun? Terrence Mann. This I honestly do definitely support this, where he definitely did need to shoot to stick around, and he did shoot. And Terrence Mann stuck around. He's been an awesome role player for the Clippers for the last couple years. This was one that you know, again, I was very kind of mean about Rui to me. But I was right to fade a guy who got Kawhi comps on draft night. Where, yeah, I think this was a great example of like a guy whose feel for the game is was kind of behind, whose general defense and physical tools weren't crazy. He wasn't. See, this was one that I weirdly like. This is a weird like the divergence in philosophy for me because Rui was another one of these guys who like people banked on to be a shooter because of his great touch and free throws, but he never shot any threes. And that's what was like, oh, he's not going to shoot. But why did I, not keep that same logic internally consistent for Grant Williams or Brandon Clark? Who knows? But yeah, just the feel kind of quote unquote indicators, the passing numbers, the steal numbers, like all of those were really poor. And I do think those are generally fairly important indicators. There's a couple other fun ones in here. Dean Wade, I loved Dean Wade. Should have had him higher as well, but I think this was a good call. Legit size, shooting, passing, and Dean Wade's been good when he was able to play. Let's keep looking. Daniel Gafford, definitely I should have. I don't know, man. Like I just don't think this was very smart, and I don't understand what my fixation was about this oversaturation of bigs. Yeah, I don't know. He's a lot better than Bruno Fernando was. And there's another one, Lou Dort. Again, something I just doesn't know how to play basketball. Is kind of like unnecessarily rude to me and doesn't actually mean anything. But I was just way too low on his tools and what he did as a freshman. And there's another one in here that I've done a video on who I was really low on. Calvin Johnson, better than I thought he would be for sure. Naz Reid, yeah. Where his defense was really bad in college, and he did have a lot of these issues. I think I was correct about the issues, but I was not correct about valuing his special skills, which, like, yeah, more than nothing on a gamble on his shooting and handling skills, but those are really elite, valuable traits for a legit center-sized guy. Once again, valuing the special traits, I definitely didn't do nearly as much as I should have. Anything else interesting in this back end here? KZ Okpala was another guy who people loved. I have this kind of fixation again. My fixation on like statistical indicators has definitely gone down since then, where I had this like quote unquote like list of death, as I said, under 2 block, under 2 steal, under 58 true shooting. All of these are very arbitrary indicators. And even here we have good players that like Harrison Barnes ended up being good. Kuzma, Cam Thomas is solid. Malcolm Brogdon. So yeah, even though most of these players ended up not hitting, Clarkson was a hit. Just because a player hits certain statistical markers doesn't necessarily mean that they're not going to be good. And let's kind of increase these a little bit. And we get a bunch of good players. Brandon Miller, Jaylen Brown, Julius Randle, Jamal Murray. These filters are very arbitrary, and that's kind of what I want to get at with this. Let's keep going through this one. Anything else interesting? Chris Clemens, absolute GOAT. Small guard extraordinaire. Admiral Schofield, I remember people were very high on him, or there were some people who were pretty high on the time, and that was something I think correctly pushed back on. Yeah, just being a straight up catch and shoot guy with solid enough defense, not good enough, pretty much. But I think that's going to be about it. John Elmore. My first ever draft article was on John Elmore, which is funny. But yeah, that's about it. I wrote a shitload on this draft, and like I said, I don't think this was very good work, but it was a lot of work, and I'm, happy I did it at the time. Let me know what you think of this. I would be happy to do more of this, like reacting to my old stuff. My takes here were not great, but hopefully, I think I've learned a lot from this. Hopefully you can learn a little bit too and enjoy some of these kind of ridiculous opinions I had.